All right. Um,
And I went ahead and resumed the recording. I had paused it since I joined a bit early.
awesome. All right. Thanks, Jen.
Sure.
All right. I guess we'll go ahead and get started then. Jen, looks like you're up first on the agenda for discussion on the town hall.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So sorry, apologies for my voice. It's a little scratchy, getting over something. So we communicated about trying to put together a town hall. The date for that was initially envisioned as being July 18th. We're getting a bit close. We're less than a week away, or just about a week away. We do have some ideas for what we wanted to share. We wanted to keep it more high level for folks that haven't necessarily been joining the TAC meetings or working group meetings or project meetings, but folks that have heard about OpenSSF and want to get more involved. So that's the angle that we were wanting to take this time around. That said, we did want to invite a few projects or working groups to come in and talk a bit, again, more high level about what they're working on. And we've so far just had one working group step forward to volunteer to participate. The remainder of the agenda would be, either from myself or Brian or from Jennifer Bly from a marketing perspective, kind of giving an overview of how to get involved, events that are coming up, maybe a recap of OpenSSF Day, and various items like that. But we really wanted to keep the content not so much focused on the staff, like providing an update and having the community more involved. So I guess the question is, are there at least 2 or maybe 3 other working groups or projects that would be interested in participating next Monday? If not, and you need a little bit more time, we could push the date out a couple weeks to give you a little bit more time, because I know that it's been really busy, and we've had, as Brian has mentioned, there's been a lot of big asks from the community to participate in events of late. So certainly understood there, but wanted to throw that out there and see what y'all think. I think if we don't have any immediate volunteers, Brian, what do you think? Giving it to the end of the day and then making a decision about pushing it out?
I mean, it's really important to me that it not be OpenSSF staff, even though David could talk for a full hour and make it like really enjoyable and all that. It's pretty important to me that it not fundamentally rest on OpenSSF staff to deliver the town halls. So I kind of feel like unless there's a strong sentiment, and here on the TAC call is where I assume most people interested in doing this kind of work would be. Unless there's strong sentiment on this call, we should probably just go ahead and defer to a future date. I don't know if that's a few weeks out or further, but I really want to see this come from this group rather than be something that we impose on you.
Is the request? Croak, do you want to go? Okay. Is the request specifically for working group leads to step up? Since I'm looking and I'm not sure how many of them are here, or did I misunderstand?
We thought working group leads would be the ones in the best position either to summarize the work going on in the working groups or to try to delegate that to somebody else on the working group. Doesn't have to be them, but our hope is that those leads are the leaders in the working groups. But anybody here on the TAC, I'd say you don't have to wait for permission from a working group lead to volunteer to talk about your working group on such a call. So. Yeah, it's just we're trying to figure out logically how do we go cascade down in a way that doesn't end up with mass broadcast calls every time we want something. But we could adjust that approach down the road too.
I believe I saw Croak and then Vicky and then David. Hands go up. It was pretty quick though. So
I love the idea. I would love to participate. Just right now, I am tapped out with available time, so I would ask if we want to continue to do this, we defer it to a later date. That way I can get time to solicit more participation from my groups.
I would recommend we defer, not only to make sure that we can get more participation, but also so we can promote it. I mean, not just internally, but externally. We really haven't had the chance to do that yet. And it would be good to ensure we have a better chance of attendees.
Great. David?
Yeah, I was just going to comment about the potential presenters. We mentioned, I mean, not just the working group leads and TAC members, but also the project leads, the SIG leads.
Yes.
I think are all, I mean, really anybody in the community, but those I think are particularly likely be plausible speakers.
Yep. Okay.
What if, so then why don't we push for something more like early to mid-August? With enough lead time, we'll just keep hitting the TAC list, I guess, and the working group leads who hopefully could cascade the ask out to their working groups, and look for more folks. But that would give us, I mean, if we really want to take a few weeks to promote, we kind of need the speakers, or ideally we have the speakers identified early in that anyway. So do we think amongst the folks here on the call who are involved in working groups and projects that we could find 2-3 more people to be willing to talk in the next week and a half, and then promote for a mid-August town hall? Okay, I'm seeing thumbs up from Crow. So why don't we do that? Let's aim by at least the next TAC call to have kind of the folks committed, and then do a talk later. Then I see Jacques willing to volunteer to talk. Okay, thank you so much. I think that means we should do it at a time that is Australia friendly. Maybe 6 a.m. in the morning your time, but at least it wouldn't be 2 a.m. your time. We'll see if we can do that.
Yeah, can we make sure at least we tell all the working group leads, hey, we're planning on doing this, and try to convince them to commit?
We did. We emailed working group leads, but I know it's summer, right? So we also had a realistic expectation about people's availability and bandwidth during the summer. So, but it looks like there's plus ones to doing this. So looks like we have our answer.
I was, if I may just interject, I was going to point out that it's summer, and in Europe, most people are more into vacationing. So I think it'd be okay to favor a time zone, like Australia, maybe, where they don't have that, than Europe. Because I don't know there's going to be a lot of attendees from Europe mid or beginning of August, just so you know.
One final comment from Jacques, and then I think we need to move on, just given the bulk of stuff we have on the agenda. So.
Yep.
Yeah, very quickly, don't set an Australian time zone for my benefit. If it's in August, I'll be back in New York. If you know other Australians who are charming and wonderful, then sure.
Awesome.
Isn't that everyone on the continent?
Yeah, basically.
Awesome. Let the record show that. All right, moving on to the next topic. I believe Dan added this feedback from the rollout of mandating 2FA on PyPI. Dan, you want to take this?
Sure. Yeah, we have a bunch of package repository maintainers and contributors and everything here in one of our new working groups. And one of their big initial items they wanted to tackle was enabling 2FA across repositories. They did a ridiculous amount of awesome work there, doing it as carefully as they could, and started making announcements. And unfortunately, earlier this week, the PyPI PSF announcement drew a bunch of backlash from folks. And I think given our spot in the ecosystem, we consider making a statement of support for those maintainers and for that working group for the work that they did here. We discussed it a little bit in Slack, and there were some good ideas and feedback either way. But if people are generally supportive, then I think we could try to get something drafted and figure out how to post it on behalf of the TAC in the next couple of days.
Awesome. So I guess any comments or questions for Dan's proposal?
I think we should do more.
Crow holding up a Titan key, but go ahead, Josh.
Sorry, I should have raised my hand. I apologize. I think we should do more than just a comment. I mean, like we did the great MFA when last year. Like this is going to be a slog, and I'd like Jacques to chime in on this. because like he put something on Twitter where the challenge that this is really going to bring is going to be like trying to support things like account resets, because he said there's going to be more than 1 million open source users in the space. Like the amount of just everything is unfathomable. It's something we can't even comprehend. And so I think like statements are cool and I'm all for that, but we should also, I think like the OpenSSF has opportunities to do even more. Like how can we provide resources or something, you know, like put our money where our mouth is, so to speak. And so I think this feels like this is the group that should help drive all of this forward. All right,
And I can expand on that a little bit. So that tweet thread about the support burden being one of the major choke points for MFA requirements came from conversations in the securing software repo groups where we're all sort of facing that problem. And we have mooted amongst ourselves, putting up our hands for OpenSSF funding to have some sort of like a shared help desk. You know, some personal persons who could be, you know, enabled to work on multiple ecosystems so that we can pull our resources. We haven't got very much further than sort of a bit of chin stroking. One thing I will ask the TAC for, since you're all very connected and charming and influential people, is data. You know, to the degree that you belong to large organizations with large MFA rollouts, data is essential on the frequency of, you know, resets versus the population. That would give us really good guidance on what kind of estimate we would need to bring to the OpenSSF, to the TAC, to the governing board, in terms of what kind of a funding package might be necessary. So if you've got numbers, bring them.
Resets of MFAs?
Yeah, basically the problem is people do lose their keys, they do
Right.
lose their phones. And you need to have a human in the loop for that reset. Otherwise it's just the soft underbelly. And even then it's still the soft underbelly, right? Like your attackers can be pretty creative. So it's very labor intensive to vet those requests and to go through as many steps as possible, make sure that they're not a thing. So getting the kind of information at what kind of support burden we might expect to be looking at would be very helpful in deciding what kind of support we want to ask for.
So I guess I'm doing more than just a statement. I think my understanding is that we as in the OpenSSF are in securing software repos working group already, you know, working in that space, and I'm happy and supportive of that. If they need anything from the TAC, I might be very happy to support that.
Yeah, so at least I'm hearing support, Dan, but I mean, it's the TAC's decision, TAC.
I think a statement from the TAC is going to be pretty compelling. I mean, just like carries a lot of weight, and I think it could be drafted by the working group and reflect the consensus of the working group or the like. But it would be great to see this body just be able to put its stamp on it, and then we publish it in the blog and push it in the socials and get people to retweet and all that. I did also see in the thread on the Slack channel a couple of people willing to volunteer, and G. Byron, it looks like a few others, and it'd be kind of great to make it be a post. I know it's harder to write, you know, to have multiple bylines, but I would be interested in seeing that be something written by a group of people, and getting new volunteers, new energy into the org is always a secondary priority for me. So yeah, I think this is a good opportunity to do that. And third, if we do have a way to add some new coupons or do a refresh of the MFA distribution, could be another chance to say, oh, and by the way, we found a stash of this stuff. If anyone wants to play with this, just send us your info, and we'll send these coupons out to you or something like that. But I wouldn't hold up the announcement to line that up. It's just if that opportunistically is there, that'd be great.
Okay, so I saw my hand, and then Josh, and then David. I think the idea of the TAC putting public comment out is good. Happy to have, do my part to review that. balance that I would like us to strike is not to just say, yes, these are good, everyone should do it, but to acknowledge that they are in fact an additional burden. They shift the location of attack. As long as we are looking at it from that perspective, taking both sides into account on this issue, then fantastic. I think they are valuable. They're just not a panacea. I don't want us to be seen in a situation where we are saying all open source should do a thing, when clearly some open source developers feel that that thing is a burden. I don't want us to be seen as dismissing that.
And that's what the thread in the TAC channel on Slack got to, is that it's nuanced. It can't just be protest or drama and the critics are wrong. It should make a case that it acknowledges those, but still the case is strong to do the right thing here.
Sounds good. Josh and then David.
All right, thank you. Sorry, I lowered my hand and then I raised it. Andrew. My only thing, and this is kind of pointed at you a little bit, Brian. I agree we should do a statement. That's great, but my fear is always we do a statement and that's it, and then it dies. Like I want to make sure someone owns this, some working group or some group. That way, it's not, oh, we did a statement. Good job, everyone. You know, high fives for all of us. When like there's a hell of a lot more work to do. And so I just want to make sure we don't, we need to follow through, right? Follow through is hard on these things. And so that's kind of, let's make sure we have that.
David?
Yeah, so quick statements. First, we actually do have, this is broader, not specific about Dan's comment, but we do actually have some YubiKey tokens left that we can distribute for the Great MFA project. If the tax, if the tax says, hey, a statement at least is a reasonable start, I'm guessing Dan's going to start by drafting something, maybe working with the repos working group, and then try to bring a report back, the draft, a link to the back to the TAC to say yay, nay quickly in the next couple days. Is that the plan?
Yeah, that sounds right. And I had a question about where to publish. Brian already answered that before I asked, though, and said the blog. So I think that's everything I need to know.
Yeah, I think the one other thing is a brief, and Dan, you know this quite well already, but the why, because I think a lot of the backlash is under the, hey, I will use passwords. What's wrong with passwords? I think a lot of the backlash is more from the not understanding why. So a little rationale would, I think, would be helpful to deal with that. Anyway, I'm sure you'll draft something good. Thanks.
All right, Ava.
Just to comment that let's not spend too much time trying to solve the writing here. Once the working group has something, then let's iterate over email to discuss that, because I do think it is nuanced, and each of us have different and good points to bring to it. There's been some lovely chat on the side here as well about where some of this pushback comes from that I think some folks may not understand.
Great point. All right, so I guess just one quick, if anybody has any dissensions to issuing a statement, I want to give a chance for folks to vocalize that now. Otherwise, it sounds like we have consensus that everybody's supportive of moving forward. So looking at head nodding, looks like we're good. So awesome. Well, thank you for taking the action to at least pull together that draft, Dan. Look forward to helping review that. All right, next on the agenda, David, DCO enforcement.
Right. So I abused everyone's inboxes earlier, noting that while the OpenSSF charter says we're all going to be using DCOs, and that is not a thing that always happens. How's that? I'm trying to be gentle here. Some projects do enforce it, but a lot don't, and so it kind of gets lost. So I'm proposing that we just turn on enforcement on the pull requests. If you're not familiar with DCOs, they're not hard to add. Yeah, there's a little startup pain if you've not done them before, but but the key thing is that if we just enforce it, it'll become just part of the landscape as opposed to the hopes and prayers of trying to write in documentation. I realize there's gonna be a startup. I'll challenge anything. Thoughts? +1, -1. Okay, I see a plus from Crow. Bob, sir.
Yeah, +1. I would say the more that we can do to try to enforce it programmatically, such that anything in the org automatically requires it, so that this isn't a, hey, we do a scrub now, it looks great, and then a year from now we find that we've reverted from the desired state. Whether it's something our colleagues at GitHub could help us figure out, or if it's well known. I can't claim expertise in terms of all the capabilities setting GitHub org-wide policies, but I know there should be some approaches with automation that should be feasible, that we could look to implement, so that just turn it on and be done with it. Because I think it's not a question of if, it is required in the charter. To your point, it's just a matter of implementing that at this point. Ava, I think you had your hand up next.
Yep. General thumbs up to having a DCO. If we're going to, it should be turned on programmatically to all the places that require it. I'm not convinced that every single repo must have it is the right position to take. There could be some where it isn't important. I don't know yet. And a note for folks that if we do that, there's been a discussion recently. Mike Dolan weighed in, that's the LF's lawyer on this, with a comment on a different issue in the CNCF regarding DCOs, real names, and that work, especially since the OpenSSF intersects much more with the InfoSec community, many of whom don't use their legal name in public record in Git. I want to make sure that if we do something to adopt a DCO as an org officially, we are very clear in what it is requiring for the signature. And Mike Dolan summarized the LF's position very well, that this is a common name by which someone is known and can be found over time, not necessarily their legal name, what's on their passport or something.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure where we were going. Now I understand where we're going. Agreed. Can you point me to that? I mean,
yeah, I can dig up that link and drop it in Slack and the doc.
That'd be great. That'd be great. I don't think that affects turning on DCO. It's just, but maybe we need to make sure that's in the OpenSSF site of what this is about.
So it's a discussion that's come up in many forums. Most recently, the CNCF, the very contentious situation there over the past couple of weeks. I'm glad Mike weighed in the way he did. And I'm just bringing it up here to preempt us getting backlash from the security community, who will say, absolutely not.
All right, how's this? Let me take you somewhere. I'm going to wait for Ava to point me to that. I will draft an email for the working group leads to send to them. Hey, we're planning on turning this on in a few weeks. Please know blah, blah, blah. That doesn't require a legal name. And if the TAC's okay with that, we can send that out to the working group leads. And Ava, if it turns out that it shouldn't be turned on for some repo, I'm not sure why. But I guess if we've hit a backlash, then we'll find out about it in the next few weeks or when we first try to turn it on. We can turn it back off if there's a serious problem.
Chris.
Okay, that's it. Oh, sorry.
Chris,
Yeah, so no, thanks. So this is like the never-ending black hole of conversation around DCO and identity and so forth. I think that's a red herring. Yeah, but you as a maintainer of a repository, you should be looking for people putting in nobody@example.com for their email, right? And making sure that it's something reasonable. The other thing that often comes up is somebody ends up using sort of the default, GUID at github.com or whatever that GitHub slams on if you don't put something for your email. I just think the important piece here is that we have a clear understanding that when something comes into, especially code, but it could also be text, that they had the right to contribute it, right? That it's theirs, it's unique. That's what they're signing on to with the DCO. And not get all wrapped around the axle about whether or not it's somebody's real identity. I think that's just a red herring. And every project I've been on has gone through that red herring discussion. It just doesn't
doesn't end well.
All right. Any other comments on DCOs? All right. I'm going to briefly skip down to the next topic with Dr. Wheeler around org permissions for GitHub, and then switch back to the governance conversation, since I suspect that'll probably soak up the rest of the time.
Okay. All right. It's me again. Sorry. So basically, there was a discussion. Was it yesterday? That we need to double check our GitHub org permissions. I mean, frankly, just making sure our own knitting is clean. So for this request from the planning working group meeting. So volunteers desired. I mean, this is just primarily, and in many ways, it's probably a follow-up to the governance discussion we're about to have, but just trying to make sure that we minimize privileges and we remove privileges when they're no longer needed and that sort of stuff. Anybody wants to be help with that, that's great. My expectation is we're going to try to look at things, fix them up, and try to write something so that we keep them fixed. And maybe I should just say, please send me an email. Volunteer if you don't speak now.
Got it. Yeah, the only thing I'll mention, David, is we recently went through in the SigStore organization an overhaul to switch over to some Pulumi-based automation so that we can codify GitHub permissions in code themselves, and so that may be another option to look at as a choice.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind pointing me to that offline. I've heard it. I've heard that. I have not investigated further. I'm not sure we need that level. I mean, there's rather different scales involved, but if that's helpful, then that's great.
Sure. That's anything. All right. Then we're halfway through the meeting, so probably about right time to shift over to Ava and the governance update topic.
Okay. Mostly I wanted to just call folks' attention to PR 112. This is the sum of a lot of work that TAC members and other volunteers have done over the past few months to try and coalesce our different proposals around TAC governance structure. This is sort of how the technical initiatives within the OpenSSF are structured to report and relate to each other. The process for joining the OpenSSF, for moving from sandbox to incubated to graduated, all of that wrapped up, including some changes to how, or I guess clarifications, perhaps not changes, but clarifications where we hadn't had an answer before to which projects could ask for space at a conference, which projects could ask for funding or support in other ways from foundation staff, and a little bit of guidance on how exactly to do that instead of the rather ad hoc way we've been doing it to date. So it's far too long of an update to talk through the whole thing right here, but I wanted to draw folks' attention to that. Please get your comments in, and let's sort of iron out any concerns. And Brian, you raised an interesting point, which is, could we separate out some of the budgetary discussion from that PR? I think that's a reasonable request. I don't think it's necessarily feasible, as some of the structural changes also, how do I say this, are predicated upon knowing who can make a request for funding. I did try to leave out any specifics of like how much funding, and there's definitely some areas there to sort of sand off the rough edges of that. But I do think it's important for us to be able to clarify that, say, a sandbox project has less standing to request support from staff than a graduated project. But maybe that isn't what you meant.
I think getting that message across is great. That the earlier stage a project is, the less it should expect in terms of other kinds of ancillary benefits. I was just concerned to the degree that I saw things defining a process for asking for for budget, and like folks like the budget committee, which is not doing what was suggested in the PR today. It's not chartered to do that, approving requests for funding and the like. So that's where I feel like there is more work. And in fact, I think a subset of us are going to go off and work on specifically what language like that looks like. But I was just encouraging incrementalism here. Like maybe in a follow-up PR, we can have the parts that are about requesting resources and even the marketing ask by projects at different stages. Far more important to get the structure encoded and some of the stuff that has gone unsaid about how we work actually encoded into docs. So I was just kind of pleading that we could tease that apart from 112.
It may be. I'll take a look at it. I'm actually offline this week, but next week I'll take a look, unless someone else wants to volunteer to do this before then, to try and maybe separate these into 2 commits, because it's 80 or some commits so far. As we piece it together, maybe we can layer it as just 2, one that is structural and one that is procedural, and that way review those separately. I think, Brian, that would meet your request.
I think so.
Okay. Are there any other high-level comments on the PR? Feedback on the process so far, or other requests from folks who are here?
I do have 2 other high-level comments, and I did summarize these in an email to TAC on Sunday. So just repeating what I said there, but I'll try to be very brief. The first one is, I think the description. Look, I'm worried about what I've seen happen on other projects. Arno and Chris know what I'm talking about, where if you make it a little too cozy and easy for folks to be at the incubating or sandbox stage, you can end up with a very large number of very zombie projects that with lots of duplicating efforts and very little to encourage them to either work together or to move on up the ladder. Maybe there's a difference of opinion. Maybe people don't think they need to be moving on to becoming graduated, but you kind of don't want to provide so much value to folks that they don't bother trying to get to actual graduated or active status. And so just might want to think about things that nudge them or encourage them, or might even set like, hey, you can be incubating for 6 months or a year, but if you haven't moved, then we might move you automatically to up or out, basically. And then the second point is, let's see, what's the way to put it? That it's really, I want to encourage folks to consider having the TAC primarily be about managing the working groups and dealing with the meta issues that come up with that, and tend to avoid having SIGs and projects and other kind of atomic groups that report directly to the TAC for simplicity, for all sorts of kind of social management reasons. That was the 2 points I made in the email I sent on Sunday. And I feel like they're more meta. They're not easy to make as specific comments on the pull request, and may require the TAC as a whole to talk about where their heads lie in terms of a position on answers to that.
Thank you. Justin, I see your hand. I want to give a quick response to Brian's comments. I tried to capture them in the notes as well. I've heard 3 now. The first one we covered. The second one was a concern about projects stagnating at the incubating stage. I think that is a really excellent thing for the TAC as a whole to discuss. Do we see the OpenSSF as gathering a lot of potentially valuable projects that might sit at incubating for years? Do we want to limit incoming projects before that only to those that we think should or have a good chance of becoming full-fledged, long-lived projects, or build a sort of up and out test where if they don't stay for long, they go out? Sorry, if they stay too long and don't progress, then we kick them out. Those are really good questions to discuss. And the second one was the structure of too many things, the TAC. I would be happy to change that in the PR, actually. I try to reflect the current structure where some things do report into the TAC that aren't just working groups. So Justin, before I get to you, I want to do a quick straw poll. Does anyone have significant concerns about that change being done right away, just in the proposal? Say everything has to fit under a working groups to TAC only.
So if I may interject, I mean, the reason we have it the way it is because we have the SIFs, and the SIFs were meant to report to the TAC. And so it kind of, when you generalize the model, we ended up with, working groups and SIFs being possibly under, and other projects being under the TAC. I don't think we have any today. And so even if the process allows it, it doesn't mean the TAC would necessarily, use that path. But we could just leave it off.
And I'll talk about the SIF point in the next agenda item.
Cool. Okay. No other major concerns to jump in with this? Bob says not comfortable yet making that call. Okay, then let's keep noodling on it. I think it is good in general. I haven't looked through all the specifics if there are edge cases. Justin.
I just had a very tactical question, which is, when do we mean to have this done?
Last month was my goal, but here we are. So soon.
Is there anything we need to do to help get that over the line? Like, should there be a deep dive on this where you set up a group of interested folks to just go and burn it down and get all the feedback incorporated and then come back and say, okay, we think we're good? Or do we feel like the async model is working? Because it just feels like it's dragged on for a long time.
It absolutely has. We have had several sort of focus groups on this over that time. At this point, my hope was to use today's meeting and the planning meeting yesterday to get feedback on the overall proposal, spend ideally just 1-2 week cycle before we can polish it so that the next TAC meeting and have it ready for the upcoming board meeting, because with the, to Brian's earlier point about separating out the financial stuff, that would, as written today, necessitate changes in the charters of board working groups, or like the finance committee, the marketing committee. The way this proposal is currently written impacts those board committees. And so I wanted to have this ready for board review before the next board meeting.
Well, but not only that, I think there's more that we can and should do to describe the process that projects would use to apply for funding for things than even what's in this PR. Before I put that as, because I'm not even sure that asking the budget committee, as you've called it, is the right vehicle for this kind of, to approve kind of project by project requests for funding and the like. So that's why I'm kind of pleading to defer on that, while still happy to leave, that projects in incubating and sandbox can expect some support, but not as much as graduated projects.
So perhaps, Justin, the roundabout answer to your question is, if we tease this apart into a PR that the TAC can merge because it is only impacting the TAC, we could do that soon. Some of the larger changes that the TAC is now recommending require dialogue with the board and others to be able to make them, and probably also further refinement or more documentation written about how to do them. That will take longer.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate that. I will say, I feel like getting the clarity with the board is going to be really important, because as long as the TAC doesn't control a finite resource other than the time of this committee, there's not a lot of incentive for anyone to say no or bring judgment to the table when we have lots of well-intentioned projects from across the community that want to come into the umbrella for us to go and make good hard decisions on what is the right space to spend our focus on.
Completely agree. So far to date, as far as I'm aware, the only TAC member who has sort of a seat in the board meetings is the TAC chair. Would it be reasonable to have a joint meeting, TAC and board, or some subset of both, to have that dialogue?
I think a subset of us coming up with a proposal that then could be more widely considered is like just the right thing to do, and that's coming out of the planning meeting on yesterday. I think a group of us thought, Ava, Bob, I forget who else.
I couldn't make it yesterday, but.
Right. But I think you were volunteered for it.
Okay.
Just to draft something, and I could even get us started with something like that. But just to describe the process by which folks would apply for funding from a pool controlled by the TAC, And that's easy enough to do, and perhaps even could be done in time to merge into 112. But I don't think it has to wait a long time after 112 is accepted. If 112 was kind of just not about describing the process, but the fact that the structure of SIGs and working groups and the like is the way is the rest of the structural stuff. Right.
Okay. Then I think we have an order of operations here, which is separate out the TAC structure and the technical initiative structure from process and requests and budget. Since I'm going to be Bob, I see your hand just went up.
Yeah, I put a comment in the chat, but I guess two quick things. One is if it's easier for understanding, totally supportive of breaking those into two different PRs. I guess what I'm not personally comfortable with is merging a structure PR and then waiting 6 months to merge a procedural PR. I think that they can be evaluated independently if it helps for understanding, but they need to be voted on together, merged together, and reviewed with the GB together. I think it's too confusing as it is right now. Further fragmenting it, I think only exacerbates that confusion. The second point I'll make is to Brian's last comment. What I think is still confusing to me, and I suspect this would be confusing to many of our working groups or projects, either already in the foundation or looking to join the foundation, is we almost have this this blessing of different avenues to go get money. What funds are allocated to the TAC at their discretion to directly fund things versus what funds could come through work around the mobilization plan versus what funds come out of SIFs. I don't think I have a great consistent answer to give folks around when to go down which path to get something done. And I suspect that in terms of, we would want to speak with one voice as a foundation as to when to take which fork down the road. And in addition to that, making sure that we have the governing board's agreement to that particular structure and that recommendation, so that as they play their role in the foundation, they understand where buckets of money are being moved around for what purpose. I don't get the sense, based on ad hoc conversations with other GB members, that there's super deep understanding and clarity on that point. So I'm totally supportive of trying to get to clarity to where we can drive this forward, to Justin's assertion that I think we're all dying to get this behind us and move forward. But I think without that clarity, just saying like there are a variety of different paths that we could fund work doesn't really help give the organizational clarity to the TAC, in my opinion, around how to make recommendations to the working groups or to projects, as well as, how do we report back to the governing board around what more do we need, or what structure have we put in place that might exacerbate other requirements going forward. So I think there's still a lot of confusion there that just needs to get clarified before on this budget side. Unfortunately, it depends too much on the gives and gets that we talk about with the projects to leave ambiguous.
Then it might be the caffeine talking, but Bob, I'll commit to working with you and whoever else is interested on getting a procedural piece done in time for 112, to get 112 through together.
Yep. Okay, great.
Do we have anyone else who wants to volunteer to work on 112 over the next 2 weeks? Not hearing a ton of.
I can probably spend some time on it.
Okay. I would love to actually ask. Since we've had a couple really successful breakouts, let's try and do a breakout next week, early next week. Again, maybe a 1 hour session with a small subset of folks. Advertise it on the TAC list. Since those have helped us get to where we are so far. And I think with that, I think that wraps up this discussion.
I think Jen had already sent out a doodle for that. I think we could just open the aperture to the wider TAC audience and mailing list. I think that's probably the easiest approach here.
And I can add dates for early next week. So I think right now I just have Wednesday, Thursday, Friday this week. So I'll add some dates for early next week and then add in the wider TAC list.
Thanks, Jen.
And just as a procedural reminder, when we do get to the point of formally voting and merging on this overall process, it will require 7 days advance notice to the mailing list for folks to review, as well as quorum at the meeting. So this is something we have to make sure to give folks heads up to know that it's coming, and that we'll follow the requirements of the charter in that process. All right, next, Brian. I think SIFs.
Sure. Let me go and share this. And I realize we only have 10 minutes left, so I'm going to try to go very quickly through a deck that Jory predominantly authored, though you know, a couple of us on staff have also worked on, and it does talk quite a bit about some internal details, but just trying to be full transparency to all of you. But this is, let me just start with an overview that partly answers the questions Bob was asking before. Where does project funding come from? Across OpenSSF or across Linux Foundation projects in general. Membership dues, obviously sponsorship, which isn't something that we've used a lot so far, actually at all yet, but is always there as an option for us, just an additional top up that a member might decide to throw in. Specific initiative funds, which is what we're going to talk about here. And then something else that the Linux Foundation offers that some projects have used, again, we have not, which is LFX crowdfunding, which is a more distributed way to do this. Not going to walk through this because I think this is kind of the details on each is something that folks might have already envisioned, and but to focus here on what we had envisioned as doing with specific initiative funds and kind of the overall structure is that they're used to support discrete activities in a given focus area using additional ad hoc funds, similar to membership, with the exception that the funds do not go into the OpenSSF operating budget. Funds are overseen and dispersed by the contributing organizations, not the OpenSSF governing board. It requires LF staff to establish and oversee a separate charter and a budget, and it does not presume or require OpenSSF membership. And the current examples of what we have are Alpha Omega, Sigstore, and GNU Toolchain Initiative, but some of the charters for those don't quite match what we'd like to see it used. And I can talk about LFX crowdfunding separately. The reason why there's been a bit of confusion is that the term SIF itself actually accidentally developed two different meanings, one internally at the LF for things that are kind of a next step beyond another existing structure we have called a directed fund. Or an associated directed fund, which is that ADF thing, Luke, that you might have seen. And then externally, the way it was really just meant to logically describe a logically separately funded and separately operated kind of thing that carries some branding and technical oversight and relationship to OpenSSF, but it had not been entirely clear what that is. For us, an ideal OpenSSF SIF associated project really is that it will have something that requires some recurring membership dues. And that's probably because the SIF is taking on operationally something that's more than just opportunistic and which can be dialed down if in a year the membership kind of vacates and people's attention moves elsewhere. But it's instead something that is going to require hiring people, or setting up an ongoing service, like in the form of Sigstore, where running the root key server is actually operationally a complex and expensive thing. Once we do it at scale, right now it's being done really pro bono, volunteer by some folks who are eager to get out of the line of fire for that. And so for that, you really do want a structure where there's a recurring membership expectation, not just a one-time fund that has been stood up and where things can be doled out kind of piecemeal. And that's why it's something that should actually look more like other projects at the Linux Foundation, kind of freestanding. So what is that connection then to the OpenSSF? We think that there should be financial governance kind of overseen by its own funders, but with a quarterly report to the OpenSSF governing board on the progress and its financial status, just to help attest to this is an ongoing operation that's producing some real things, that is competently managing itself, and as something that's affiliated with the OpenSSF is not likely to be an embarrassment anytime soon. The technical governance of this is also important to find the right balancing act between just enough that it's not going to be an embarrassment to OpenSSF if things go wrong, but solid enough, but lightweight enough that the project doesn't feel constrained by having to check everything they do with an external body. And for that as well, the idea of quarterly reports. Now that could be direct to the TAC, or it could be to a working group under the TAC, based on our last conversation. But at some point, there's that lightweight reporting in. When should we consider making something a SIF? I kind of covered this, but it's when there's a recurring thing. It's when it's willing to follow all the same policies as an OpenSSF project would, in terms of the licensing and how it's managed as a project. Its ability to make quarterly updates, and it's obviously related to our mission. It's something that furthers some other work going on under an existing working group, or arguably is aligned with what we're doing. Also, it should be something that calls for budget greater than $250,000 a year, just as a way to right size this, so we don't end up with 500 small SIFs that are just modestly active. And currently, there's these three. They have been all set up somewhat differently, although Sigstore and GNU Toolchain perhaps most closely like each other. Alpha Omega is not yet a recurring membership structure, so there's a bit of rechartering that we need to do with each of these. But let me focus the remaining time on these last couple of slides. One is, what is the benefit for a project to become a SIF under the OpenSSF, right? To be part of the family. It should be that it gets a bandwidth and attention from the OpenSSF kind of executive and staff support for all the things that are kind of bootstrapping and which a project might not be able to bear the expenses of directly. Project management, marketing, being able to flow through our blog, our social channels, those kinds of things. And as it's bootstrapping, to step in when there isn't necessarily identified budget for project management or those different activities. Though once something grows large, like Alpha Omega has, it should have its own budget for project management and these other kinds of meta kinds of things. Should also be kind of heightened awareness and affiliation with OpenSSF and with solving the supply chain security challenges. So being at our events, again, publishing through our channels, that sort of thing. There should be as well PR and marketing support, as kind of mentioned, and then involvement in and access on the OpenSSF community tooling. Whether we require that or not could be something we talk about. Do they, right now, Sigstore and Salsa, I believe, have their own Slacks. Obviously, they have their own blogs with their own processes. I think we should work out what's just enough kind of coordination between on the marketing side that we feel like, again, there's enough, I don't want to say oversight, but enough coordination so things don't look wildly different or have wildly different standards for what gets published. But I really don't want to introduce more bureaucracy where it isn't needed. And I think these SIFs should have their own identity, their own website, their own ability to move without feeling constrained by having to coordinate with somebody central, or in the same way that projects directly under the OpenSSF TAC need to do that. And then what are the benefits to us of having SIFs? Well, they allow us to grow the footprint in more of like a franchise kind of way. They allow us to have a position to encourage, although no way require, that the projects work together on common technical visions, and that we find new ways to support important work beyond the reach of the OpenSSF's core operating budget. Finally, and I think this is an important part of thinking about governance. It's easy to come up with governance when everybody is happy and copacetic and moving in the right direction. But what if things go wrong? And this structure in particular, everything is open source, right? Everybody always has the right to fork. And in particular here, we think it's important that these projects feel like if they're not satisfied with the relationship with the OpenSSF, that they could vote with their feet and without giving up their assets, without giving up their budget, without giving up their trademarks, or the processes that they use to collaborate, they could decide to be just independent projects and not affiliated with OpenSSF anymore. If they did vote for that, we'd hope for like a cooling off period of 60 days to kind of rectify whatever is needed. But if the OpenSSF governing board agrees, then why not let that happen? Likewise, the OpenSSF governing board could decide to also allow these projects to go their own way. without such a waiting period. And this also applies for the TAC. The OpenSSF TAC can't directly tell the SIF TAC what to do, what to build, and the like. But certainly, you want to keep the OpenSSF TAC happy with what's going on, or again, a working group if we choose to push it in that way, because certainly the TAC could raise to the OpenSSF governing board, hey, this project is way off the radar, where they're not doing things that the TAC feels are appropriate. And just as the OpenSSF TAC would cancel an internal project, if it felt it was doing things that really weren't correct, likewise, they should be able to say this other SIF is doing things that we don't want to be associated with, and could raise that to the governing board. So that's the governance model as a whole. That I'm happy to share these slides with the rest of this TAC. I just wanted a chance to walk through this first before people read it cold. But basically, it's about establishing kind of a liaison agreement between what are otherwise independent projects. And I see a bunch of questions that have popped up in chat. I can try to use a few minutes to answer them, the 2 remaining minutes. Let's see. Ava's asked, it would seem that having SIFs receive support from OpenSSF common funds, the TAC's ability to gauge the organization's ability to execute, and thus gauge the rate of new projects to accept will be even less predictable. So there's a budgetary question, right? You don't want to accept 20 new SIFs without knowing what kind of burden does that place operationally upon the staff and core budget of OpenSSF. And I would say in any conversation that happens at a governing board level, because the OpenSSF governing board would have to approve setting up a SIF relationship, as they have for those 3. And at that point, I think we as staff would say, "Whoa, we're too much. We cannot scale. We can't handle SIF number 4." I think that's the place that we would constrain that. Although I would love to figure out how do we take number 4 and just redistribute our commitments to the first 3 more evenly or something like that. Let's see. Bob asks, is this a proposal or a readout of the current SIF definition operating model? The first half of this was more of a readout. The second half, it was a proposal to try to at least clarify once you realize this is about a liaison agreement between 2 otherwise independent projects, I think that helps clarify a lot of the other ramifications for this and distinguish it from other projects and technical initiatives internal to the TAC. Questions are coming in hot and heavy. Clearly, we should have more time for this. The process for approving addition of a SIF, and I forget if I had it in here, but the idea is that the OpenSSF TAC would approve a proposal from a project to become a SIF first, and so that evaluation is based on the technical merits, as well as is this a team that's likely to be responsive when we say, here's some feedback on the direction you're heading in, and is this aligned with the mission? And then once the TAC is approved, it would go to the governing board to approve. And the governing board definitely wants to know that technically these things are solid before it's even asked to make such a decision. Then let's see. I think we're probably at time, and maybe I should answer.
I guess my ask I put in chat was just that if part of the slides are a proposal, if we can clearly mark that at the top to say, hey, this isn't ratified in a document that's been approved by the requisite bodies. If we could do that, that would be ideal, so people understand kind of what's analysis in a readout versus what's under discussion that needs to be taken forward. I think that would be super helpful.
Okay. Yeah, certainly this deck was more meant as a way to explore the topic.
We're at time. I think there's probably a number of questions. So what I would propose here is we can continue dialogue async, but we'll add this as another recurring item for the next TAC meeting's agenda.
Okay.
So with that, thanks everybody for participation today. There is a question at the bottom of the meeting notes around the regular cadence for working groups and projects to come back to the TAC to give an update. Please take a look at that, and assuming that you're okay with that, please +1 it, and then that gives Jen the go ahead and start scheduling those as well. So thanks everybody. Talk to you later.